reporting that the monarch has withdrawn his invitation for Harry and Meghan to come to Sandringham over the summer. And the best news is that this is a response to what she describes as the Australia trauma tour.
The camera never shows the moment a father finally decides he has had enough. But sometimes the silence around that decision says more than any public statement ever could. And right now that silence surrounding King Charles III is louder than anything we have seen in years. Because when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle expected a quiet path back into the royal fold, something shifted behind palace doors. And what happened next is forcing the entire royal family to confront a question they have avoided for far too long. But here's the part nobody is saying out loud yet. Why now, and why this suddenly? Because reports suggest that King Charles III didn't just ignore the situation this time, he acted. And that single decision has created a ripple effect that reaches far beyond one cancelled invitation, raising a much bigger question about power, control, and the future of the monarchy itself. And if you think this is just about a summer visit to Sandringham, then you are missing the real story entirely, because according to insider reporting, the issue is not the visit. It is what that visit would have unlocked. Now think about this carefully, because this is where everything begins to take a different shape. When Prince Harry publicly floated the idea of visiting Sandringham, it was framed as something casual, almost harmless, as if a son simply wanted to reconnect with his father. But palace insiders suggest the reality was far more calculated, because stepping onto royal property as an invited guest of King Charles III would potentially trigger state-funded protection, something Prince Harry has been pursuing relentlessly. And suddenly, what looked like a personal visit begins to resemble something else entirely, something strategic. But here's where it gets uncomfortable, because if that interpretation is even partially true, then this was never about reconciliation in the first place, it was about leverage, and that raises a serious question for you as a viewer. Do you believe this was genuinely about family, or does this feel like a negotiation disguised as emotion? And just when you think the situation cannot become more complicated, the timing of everything starts to raise even more questions, because according to reports, this entire situation escalated immediately after what insiders are calling the Australia fallout, a trip that on the surface looked like a routine public appearance, but behind the scenes created significant backlash. Public response numbers reportedly dropped sharply, and concerns began to emerge not just about optics, but about cost, messaging, and intent. Now pause for a second, because this is where the tone of the story shifts completely, and this is where many believe Prince William began pushing harder internally, because the issue was no longer just public image, it was institutional credibility. When non-working royals appear to operate in ways that blur the line between service and personal branding, it creates a direct challenge to how the monarchy presents itself to the world, and that is not a small problem, especially for a future king like Prince William who is already focused on long-term stability. But then something else happened, and this is where everything becomes even more sensitive, because while King Charles III was preparing for one of the most important diplomatic moments of his reign, reports indicate that Prince Harry made a highly visible international appearance that drew attention at exactly the wrong time. And this is where critics began asking a question that is still echoing across royal coverage. Was this a coincidence, or part of a pattern? Because if you step back and look at the timeline, from major interviews to book releases to public appearances, there appears to be a recurring overlap between royal milestones and Sussex headlines. And while some believe this is accidental, others are not so convinced. And this is where I want to ask you directly. When patterns repeat like this, do you still call it coincidence, or does it start to feel intentional? Now inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction reportedly shifted from frustration to something much more serious, because this was no longer just about image management, it was about pressure, and specifically the kind of pressure that affects leadership during critical moments. Reports suggest that advisors close to King Charles III began emphasizing the impact of ongoing stress, especially given his current health situation, and that detail changes everything, because now this is not just institutional tension, this becomes personal in a way that cannot be ignored. And this is where Catherine, Princess of Wales, quietly becomes part of the story as well, because alongside Prince William, the Princess of Wales represents stability, consistency, and public trust, which makes any disruption to that balance even more noticeable. The contrast between structured royal duty and unpredictable external narratives is becoming harder for the public to ignore, and that contrast is shaping perception more than any official statement ever could. But here is the deeper layer that many people are only starting to notice, and it is not just about public appearances or family tension, it is about control over narrative, because the modern monarchy does not operate in silence anymore, it operates in a global media environment where perception moves faster than policy, and right now, that environment is being tested from both inside and outside the institution. And just when it seems like King Charles III might continue his usual approach of patience and quiet management, this decision to withdraw the invitation suggests something different, something more decisive, and that raises the most important question of this entire situation. Is this the moment where King Charles III finally draws a clear line? Because if this is the beginning of a stronger response, then what comes next could redefine not just the relationship between Prince Harry and the royal family, but the structure of the monarchy itself, and that is where this story becomes much bigger than a single event. So before we move forward, think about this carefully. If you were in King Charles III's position, balancing family, public duty, and institutional pressure, would you choose reconciliation, or would you choose control? Because what happens next is not just a reaction, it is a turning point. And just when it seemed like the situation was already spiraling into something irreversible, another layer quietly emerged that made the entire conflict far more complicated than a simple family disagreement. Because what insiders are now pointing to is not just emotional distance between King Charles III and Prince Harry, but a growing institutional fear that the rules of the monarchy are being tested in ways they were never designed to handle. And this is where everything starts to feel less like a private dispute and more like a structural threat. Because if you look closely at how the modern royal family operates, every action is carefully balanced between tradition and public accountability. Yet what we are seeing from Meghan Markle and Prince Harry appears to blur that line repeatedly, creating a situation where the monarchy cannot easily respond without setting a precedent that could affect future generations. And that raises a critical question for you. If one branch of the royal family can operate independently while still benefiting from royal association, does that weaken the entire system? Now this is where reports surrounding the Australia visit become even more significant, because what initially looked like a standard international appearance began to trigger deeper concerns inside Buckingham Palace, particularly regarding how public funds, optics, and messaging were being perceived. According to commentary circulating among royal observers, the backlash was not just about one event, but about a pattern of behavior that seemed increasingly difficult to defend publicly. And when public sentiment shifts in countries historically supportive of the monarchy, that is not something the institution can afford to ignore. But here's where the story takes an even sharper turn, because alongside the public reaction, there were reports of commercial elements appearing in contexts that many felt should have remained strictly humanitarian, and that created a deeper ethical question about where the boundary between service and personal branding should be drawn. And when that boundary becomes unclear, the monarchy faces a credibility challenge that goes beyond headlines. So let me ask you directly. Should royal-linked appearances ever intersect with commercial promotion, or does that cross a line that cannot be undone? And while this debate was already intensifying, something else began unfolding behind the scenes that made the situation even more volatile, because insiders suggest that Prince William had already been advocating for a firmer approach long before this moment, not out of personal conflict, but out of concern for long-term institutional stability. Unlike King Charles III, who has historically leaned toward patience and reconciliation, Prince William is often described as more decisive when it comes to protecting the future of the monarchy, and that difference in leadership style is now becoming impossible to ignore. But what makes this even more intense is the timing of everything, because while the monarchy was preparing for major diplomatic engagements, including high-level international interactions, the actions of Prince Harry once again intersected with those moments in a way that raised eyebrows among commentators and analysts. Reports suggest that a public appearance involving political messaging occurred just days before a critical state visit, and whether intentional or not, the overlap created unnecessary complications for King Charles III at a time when precision and neutrality were essential. And this is where the conversation becomes even more serious, because the monarchy operates on a principle of political neutrality, and any perceived deviation from that principle, even indirectly, can have diplomatic consequences. So when a member closely associated with the royal family appears to engage in political commentary, it creates a situation that the institution must either address or risk being drawn into controversy. And that leads to an uncomfortable but necessary question. Should individuals who retain royal titles be held to stricter boundaries, even after stepping away from official duties? Now, as all of this was unfolding, another dimension quietly began to surface, one that many believe is driving a significant portion of these decisions, and that is the financial reality behind the scenes. Reports circulating among media insiders suggest that the public perception of major deals involving Netflix and Spotify may not fully reflect the actual outcomes, and that has led to increased scrutiny over sustainability, long-term strategy, and public expectations. And when financial narratives begin to diverge from reality, it often creates pressure that influences behavior in ways that are not immediately visible. But here's where it becomes even more complex, because if those reports are accurate, then the need to maintain relevance and visibility becomes not just a branding strategy, but a necessity, and that could explain why public appearances, media moments, and strategic positioning appear to intensify during critical periods. And that leads to a deeper question for you. If visibility becomes essential for survival, does that naturally lead to more aggressive public positioning? Meanwhile, within the core of the royal family, figures like Catherine, Princess of Wales, continue to represent a steady and traditional approach to royal duty, which only amplifies the contrast between two very different models of public life. On one side, there is controlled, institution-first engagement, and on the other, there is a more independent, media-driven approach, and that contrast is shaping public perception in ways that are becoming increasingly difficult to balance. And just when it feels like the monarchy might still attempt to manage this quietly, the growing public conversation is beginning to push towards something more definitive, because commentators, analysts, and even sections of the public are now openly discussing actions that were once considered unthinkable, including changes to titles, roles, and official recognition. And whether or not those actions actually happen, the fact that they are being discussed at this level signals a shift that cannot easily be reversed. So now we arrive at a critical turning point in the story, because what began as tension between individuals is evolving into a broader debate about identity, authority, and the future direction of the monarchy itself. And if King Charles III is indeed being pushed toward a more decisive stance, then the next move will not just respond to the present situation, it will define how similar situations are handled for years to come. And this is where I want you to think carefully again. If a system built on tradition is forced to adapt to modern pressures, how far can it bend before it risks losing what made it stable in the first place? Because what comes next is not just escalation. It is a test of control, and the outcome may change everything. And just when it seemed like the pressure was already reaching a breaking point, the story quietly shifted again, because what insiders are now focusing on is not just public behavior or institutional tension, but something far more revealing beneath the surface. The financial reality that may be driving every move we are seeing right now. And once you understand this layer, the entire situation begins to make a different kind of sense. Because reports suggest that the widely publicized deals associated with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle may not be as straightforward as they once appeared, and that raises a serious question about sustainability, long-term positioning, and the pressure that comes with maintaining a global profile. When names like Netflix and Spotify are attached to a narrative, expectations automatically rise. But what happens when those expectations begin to clash with reality? And this is where things become even more uncomfortable, because insiders claim that some projects have struggled to materialize in the way they were initially presented, while others have failed to generate the kind of long-term traction that was expected from such high-profile partnerships. And if that is even partially accurate, then the pressure to remain visible, relevant, and commercially viable becomes not just important, but urgent. So let me ask you directly. When public image becomes tied to financial survival, does that change the way decisions are made? Now pause for a moment, because this is where the story deepens in a way that many people overlook, since maintaining a lifestyle that includes private security, multiple properties, and ongoing legal matters creates a level of financial demand that few individuals can sustain indefinitely without consistent high-level income. And when reports begin to suggest that expenses are rising while opportunities are becoming less predictable, it creates a situation where visibility itself becomes a strategy. And suddenly, every appearance, every statement, and every headline begins to serve a dual purpose. But here's where it gets even more complicated, because alongside these financial pressures, there are also reports of internal differences emerging between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle regarding long-term direction, priorities, and public strategy. And while none of this has been officially confirmed, the suggestion alone introduces a new layer of tension that could influence everything moving forward. And that leads to a deeper question for you. If two people are navigating both public scrutiny and private pressure at the same time, how long can alignment truly last? And just when it seems like these pressures are contained within their own world, the ripple effect reaches back into the royal family. Because the monarchy does not operate in isolation, it is directly impacted by how its members are perceived globally. When narratives surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle shift, they inevitably reflect back onto King Charles III, Prince William, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, creating a situation where personal decisions begin to carry institutional consequences. And this is where insiders suggest that the patience traditionally associated with King Charles III is being tested in a way that feels different from before, because the combination of public controversy, financial speculation, and repeated media cycles is no longer something that can simply be managed quietly. At some point, the question shifts from how do we respond to do we respond at all? And that distinction is critical. But what makes this moment even more significant is the growing sense that time is no longer on anyone's side, because the longer uncertainty continues, the more it shapes public perception, and perception, as we know, is one of the most powerful forces influencing the monarchy today. And this is where Prince William's perspective becomes increasingly relevant, since his approach is often described as more direct, more structured, and more focused on long-term institutional clarity rather than short-term emotional balance. Now here's where I want you to think carefully again. If you were responsible for protecting an institution that has lasted for generations, would you prioritize family unity, or would you prioritize the stability of the system itself? Because that is exactly the position King Charles III appears to be navigating right now, and every decision, including the reported withdrawal of that invitation, begins to look less like a reaction and more like part of a larger strategy. And if that is true, then what we are witnessing is not a moment of conflict, but a gradual shift towards something more decisive. And just when it feels like all the pieces are finally visible, another question begins to surface, one that could redefine everything moving forward. Because if financial pressure, public perception, and institutional responsibility are all converging at the same time, then the next move will not just affect individuals, it will shape the future direction of the monarchy itself. So let me ask you one more time. When pressure builds from every direction at once, does that lead to compromise, or does it force a decision that cannot be undone? Because what comes next is not just escalation. It is the beginning of a turning point that may change everything. And just when it feels like every layer of this story has already been exposed, another dimension begins to surface that changes how all of these events connect. Because what is now being discussed more openly is not just behavior, not just finances, but authority itself, and who ultimately controls what it means to be part of the royal institution in the modern era. And this is where the situation moves from tension into something much closer to a power decision. Because for years, King Charles III has been described as a monarch who prefers gradual solutions, someone who believes that time, patience, and quiet diplomacy can resolve even the most difficult internal conflicts. Yet what we are seeing now suggests that this approach may be reaching its limits, especially as external pressure continues to grow from public opinion, media narratives, and internal royal expectations led increasingly by Prince William. And that contrast between patience and decisiveness is no longer subtle. It is becoming a defining feature of this entire situation. But here's where the story becomes even more serious, because insiders suggest that discussions are no longer centered around managing appearances, but around defining boundaries, and that is a very different kind of conversation. When an institution begins to consider formal limits, whether symbolic or structural, it signals that something deeper has shifted, something that cannot simply be smoothed over with time. And this leads to a question that sits at the heart of everything. Should association with the monarchy come with permanent obligations, even after stepping away from official duties? Now think about how significant that question really is, because the monarchy operates not just on law, but on tradition, perception, and consistency, and once those elements begin to fracture, restoring them becomes far more difficult than maintaining them in the first place. Reports suggest that advisors around King Charles III have been exploring what options actually exist within the monarch's authority, including ways to clarify who represents the crown and who does not. And while nothing has been officially confirmed, the mere existence of these discussions signals a shift that is impossible to ignore. And this is where history quietly enters the conversation, because there have been moments before when royal structures were adjusted to protect the institution from evolving pressures. And those moments were never taken lightly. They were decisions made only when the balance between tradition and necessity could no longer hold. And that raises an important question for you. If history shows that change is possible, does that mean change is now inevitable? But just when it seems like this is purely about institutional control, another layer complicates everything even further, because the public itself is now becoming part of the pressure equation. Conversations across media platforms, commentary from analysts, and shifting audience sentiment are all contributing to a growing expectation that something more definitive should happen. And when public expectation reaches a certain level, it becomes increasingly difficult for leadership to remain neutral. And this is where Catherine, Princess of Wales, plays a subtle but important role again, because alongside Prince William, the Princess of Wales embodies the version of the monarchy that continues to resonate strongly with the public, one built on consistency, service, and clarity of role. And when that model is contrasted with uncertainty elsewhere, it naturally shapes how audiences interpret the entire situation, even without direct commentary. But then comes the most sensitive part of all, because while the monarchy is evaluating structure and authority, it is still dealing with family. And that tension between institution and personal relationship is what makes every decision so complex. King Charles III is not only a monarch navigating public duty, he is also a father facing a situation that no strategy can fully simplify, and that human element is something that continues to influence how far he is willing to go. And here's where I want you to pause again and think carefully, because this is no longer just about what is possible, it is about what is acceptable, both publicly and personally. If you were balancing legacy, leadership, and family all at once, where would you draw the line? Because as this pressure builds, something else becomes increasingly clear, and that is the role of timing, since every delay, every hesitation, and every moment of inaction adds another layer of speculation, another wave of commentary, and another shift in public perception. And in a media environment that moves as quickly as today's, time is no longer neutral. It actively shapes the narrative whether decisions are made or not. And just when it seems like the monarchy might continue to navigate this quietly, the accumulation of events, from public appearances to financial discussions to institutional concerns, is creating a situation where silence itself begins to feel like a statement. And that is when leadership is often forced into action, not necessarily because it wants to act, but because not acting becomes a decision in itself. So now we arrive at a moment that feels less like a continuation and more like a threshold, because whatever happens next will not just respond to the present, it will define how the monarchy handles similar challenges in the future, setting a precedent that could shape its evolution for decades. And this leads us directly into the next phase of the story, because if discussions are already happening behind the scenes, if pressure is already building both internally and externally, then the real question is no longer whether a decision will be made, but what kind of decision it will be, and how far it will go. So before we move forward, let me ask you one final question for this moment. Do you believe the monarchy is preparing for a controlled adjustment, or are we heading toward a much more dramatic shift than anyone is publicly admitting? Because what comes next is not just a response, it is a defining move. And just when it seems like every possible outcome has already been discussed, the situation takes one final turn that brings everything into sharp focus. Because what King Charles III does next will not simply resolve a family dispute, it will define the limits of royal authority in a modern world that no longer accepts ambiguity. And this is where the story stops being about speculation and starts becoming about consequence. Because reports suggest that the pressure surrounding King Charles III has now reached a point where inaction carries just as much weight as action, and that is a dangerous place for any leader to be, especially one balancing personal relationships with institutional responsibility. While Prince Harry and Meghan Markle continue to operate in a space that blends independence with royal association, the monarchy itself is being forced to answer a question it has quietly avoided for years. Where does the line actually exist? And here is where the internal divide becomes impossible to ignore, because insiders increasingly describe Prince William, the future king, as someone who believes that clarity is no longer optional, while King Charles III has historically leaned toward preserving relationships wherever possible. That difference in philosophy is now shaping the direction of the entire institution, and if that balance tips even slightly, the outcome could redefine how the monarchy functions moving forward. But what makes this moment even more critical is the growing realization that public perception is no longer a secondary factor, it is a driving force, because audiences across the United Kingdom, the United States, and Commonwealth nations are actively forming opinions about what accountability should look like within the royal family. And when that level of public engagement reaches a tipping point, it creates a momentum that leadership cannot easily ignore. So let me ask you directly. Should public opinion influence decisions at the highest level of the monarchy, or should tradition remain the only guiding force? Now as this pressure builds, discussions surrounding potential actions are becoming more visible, including the possibility of redefining roles, limiting official recognition, or formally clarifying that certain individuals no longer represent the crown in any capacity. While none of these steps have been confirmed, the fact that they are being seriously considered suggests that the monarchy is preparing for a shift that goes beyond symbolic gestures. And if that shift happens, it will not just affect Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, it will set a precedent for how similar situations are handled in the future. But here is where the emotional weight of the situation returns, because behind every institutional decision stands a personal reality that cannot be ignored, and King Charles III is still a father navigating a relationship that has played out under global scrutiny. That human dimension complicates every possible outcome, because any decisive action risks being interpreted not just as leadership, but as personal rejection, and that is a line few people would willingly cross without hesitation. And this is where Catherine, Princess of Wales, also known as Kate Middleton, becomes a quiet but powerful contrast within the narrative, because alongside Prince William, the Princess of Wales represents a model of consistency that reinforces the traditional expectations of royal duty. The stability projected by Catherine, Princess of Wales and Prince William continues to strengthen public trust, and that contrast only intensifies the pressure on King Charles III to ensure that the institution remains clearly defined. But just when it feels like the decision is inevitable, another possibility lingers in the background, because King Charles III could still choose a path of controlled restraint, maintaining distance without taking formal action, allowing time to reshape the situation naturally. And that raises one final question for you. Is restraint a sign of strength in this case, or does it risk allowing uncertainty to grow even further? Because the truth is, no matter which path King Charles III chooses, the consequences will extend far beyond this moment, shaping how the monarchy adapts to a world where tradition and modern reality are constantly colliding. This is not just about titles, appearances, or invitations. It is about defining identity in a system that depends on clarity to survive. And as we reach the end of this unfolding story, one thing becomes clear: the situation is no longer waiting to be resolved quietly. It is building toward a decision that will mark a turning point for everyone involved. Whether that decision comes through direct action or continued restraint, it will answer a question that has been growing louder with each passing event. What does it truly mean to belong to the royal family in the modern era? So now I want to hear your perspective, because this is where your voice becomes part of the conversation. If you were in the position of King Charles III, balancing legacy, leadership, and family, would you take decisive action, or would you continue to hold the line and hope for resolution over time? And if you want to understand where this story could go next, and how these decisions might reshape the future of Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle within the monarchy, make sure you stay with this channel, because the next chapter may be even more revealing than what we have just uncovered. And as always, if this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture behind the headlines, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below, because in a story like this,